Good morning. Hope you all are doing well. Thank you very much for joining us today for Social Sectors Unite, which is our second annual event with this esteemed group of authors who are here to talk a little bit about their book, Unicorns Unite, and really where we are in the movement. Just a brief welcome to everyone here in the room and those who are watching via live stream, as well as the 20-plus live stream watch parties we have across the country. And I am going to take a moment to recognize each of them because I feel like they have done some good work bringing their community together, taking advantage of the wonderful offer of the authors to put together a facilitator's guide and really talk to their communities and really have deep conversations of where this is going. So if you all can bear with me, I'm going to shout out their names, and if you're in one of those watch parties, give yourselves a big hand. So I would like to welcome Arts of the Midwest in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Boston Foundation, Community Foundation of Northeast Iowa, Council on Foundations, Delta Dental of Iowa, Future Fund for Education in New York, Grant Brook in Toronto, Ontario, so we can say this is an international event. Green Tree Community Health Foundation in Philadelphia, Green Light Fund, who has multiple cities around the country, Hackensack Meridian Health Foundation, Little Manila in Stockton, California, Nuru International in Palo Alto, OpenGov Hub in Washington, D.C., Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors in Chicago, Silicon Valley Community Foundation in Mountain View, University of Northern Iowa, the Participatory Budgeting Project in Brooklyn, and Europe in Boston. So let's all give each other a big hand for being here today. Thank you all. I'm Michelle Dilworth. I am the director of Candid West, and my wonderful unicorn title is, well, my name is Whirling Flowing Glitter, which I absolutely love. And I am the whisperer of data, which makes it seem very appropriate for me who works at Candid. I'm going to introduce my other wonderful guests first. And so right now I would like to welcome, I want to say the voice of God or Wizard of Oz wizard. We have with us Vu Le, who is the ED of the Rainier Valley Corps, who is joining us via live stream. Vu, do you want to share your unicorn name?
Good morning, everyone. This is Cerulean Dapple Sunrise, the face of meeting. My apologies for looming over you.
Thank you for sharing. Then we have Jane, who is the CEO of Smarter Good. And would you please share your unicorn name?
Sure. I am Rising Magic Sunrise, harvester of crappy printer.
Which we all can relate to.
Oh, yeah. Multiple crappy printers.
And then we have Jessica Shams Lau, who is currently the ED of the Peary Foundation. Jasmine. Did I say Jessica? I'm so sorry. Jasmine.
And my unicorn name is Rising Regal Moonbeam, Breath of Emails.
Great.
It's my arch nemesis.
Do you want to use the mic real quick so everyone
Sorry.
can hear you?
Yes, there we go. Tip for tat there. Rising Regal Moonbeam, Breath of Emails.
Great. Thank you all. So before we get started on the program, I just wanted to give everyone a brief overview of how this is going to play out for the day. So what we're going to do is just start with a couple of slides of kind of context setting, and then we'll go into a moderated discussion with the panels. And then after that, at the top of the hour, so for here, it will be 11 a.m. Pacific time, and you all can do the math elsewhere as to what that means for you. We're going to stop the in-person the live stream portion, and then let the watch parties continue with the facilitation of their discussions, and then we will do so here in the room. So just to let you know. And after the moderated questions, we are going to open it up for questions from you. So I just want to give you a brief overview on how that will happen. So those of you in the room, we would ask that you come up to the podium to ask your questions, just so that everyone can benefit both here in the room and on the live stream and watch party so they can hear your questions. And then for those watching live stream or at the watch parties, you can just type in your question in the chat box right by the video, and we will get those questions up here and we will ask on your behalf. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jessamine so that she can give us a brief context setting for ourselves.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for making it here on a rainy San Francisco morning. So Laurie and I earlier were just trying to figure out how we were going to do the slide advancing, and so we came up with a very unicorns appropriate moment of every time the slide is going to be advanced, I'm going to spread unicorn glitter. So Laurie, thank you. We don't take ourselves very seriously here. Okay, so our sector is in this funny, interesting, reflective moment. We have many of us kind of asking these questions of, is what I'm doing actually working? Is the way that I'm doing it the most appropriate and effective way to do what I'm doing? And what is the end goal? Is all of our work that we believe in and strive for, is it actually coming together to make the change that we need to see in the world right now? So, some of this reflection has been catalyzed by this building and increasing movement of criticism of our sector. And there are many voices that have taken part in this wave of critique. They have varied framing, they have varied tone to the critique, varied ideas of what needs to change and how it needs to change, and some people don't even offer any suggestions of how to change. They're just saying this isn't working. But whether you've read one of these books or whether you're aware of, a multitude of these messages, it can be really, really downheartening and depressing. It can be paralyzing thinking about how am I supposed to respond to all of these ideas of what I should be doing better when I don't even know if I have full power over deciding how I do my job and the resources that I have to do it. So we recognize, the Unicorns Unite co-authors, we've recognized that we're part of this critique, right? We played a part in ushering this lovely wave of paralysis onto our sector. And so in typical Unicorns Unite style, we want to tackle this head on, but do it honestly and boldly, and of course not take ourselves too seriously, and really think practically, how can we use this moment with hope together as a positive force for good? So that's why we're all here today. And that's why I hope that you're all here today, is for us to together figure out the answers to that. So with that, I'll hand back to Michelle.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate that overview, Jessamine. Just to make sure that we're all starting from the same place, though, I thought we would go back about a year and a half ago, or even further, as you were all thinking about this, and just talk about a little bit of it about the book. And what was the impetus for you all coming together to write this book? And what were you hoping to achieve? Obviously, it's one of many of those books on that list of critiques of the sector. And I'm just wondering if you could just share, to level set for those who might not have read the book. Hopefully you will be reading soon. But just to help us get on the same page.
Yeah. So the impetus of us writing this book was Jane and I, Vu and I, us and everybody having all of these kind of back alley conversations where it was like at the end of the conference call or the end of the one-on-one check-in or at the bar at the conference when we were bemoaning this, that, and the other, where we were having these kind of hush-toned conversations of, this isn't working, or I heard about this awful thing that happened. Why can't we change this? This isn't, our relationships are broken, is what all of these conversations were unearthing. And the book was really our effort to play a part in bringing that conversation out into the open. And doing so in a way that said a lot of the hard things so that it hopefully makes it easier to start these discussions in people's organizations, and where you're not sure if your boss or your board or your team is ready to have the conversation, but also to do it in a way that was accessible, that was hopeful, and that had a little bit of fun along the way.
Yes, a lot of fun. Those are such great illustrations, and I don't know if you all know this, but Jessamine was the one who was making those illustrations, which brought in a lot of the fun. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Vu, I'm going to start with you and just think about the critiques that we're hearing, and I just want to hear if you have any ideas on if you wanted to share some of the reactions you've heard, both good and maybe not so good, for what the book Unicorns Unite and all these other critiques have been surfacing within the sector.
And talking about the critiques of the book itself or of the foundations?
Well, just about the relationships in general and what this book has brought out in terms of the critique of the sector.
Yeah, I feel like the book has been really accessible. People like being able to read, and the reactions I've been getting is like, this is amazing, like that you're able to speak about this. And sometimes people say, I never thought about it this way, or I didn't have the words for this, like overhead hole. People like, oh my gosh, this foundation is an overhead hole. And we got that from the book. And I think it's great for us to have the same language and concept. So the reaction to the book has been really wonderful.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Would either of you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I think, Jane, do you want to go? I feel like I've talked. Okay. I think both to our book and to other critiques that have come out, we've definitely seen a range. And as Vu said, there's some people who like run up to you and like, oh my gosh, I read your book in one sitting last night and I just want to do all the things. And I feel like, I can make change in this broken system. And then other people who are like, oh my gosh, I read your book, I've read Winners Take All, and I'm in major depression right now, and I'm having a complete midlife crisis, and I just feel like I have to ignore all of this if I'm going to continue in my job and, actually still feel that passion and energy and motivation to do what I'm doing rather than feeling like I'm failing and it's all worthless.
Great. Jane, do you have any more to add? Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, one of the things, so it seems like a range of reactions. And for those who might be kind of stepping on the brake instead of the gas pedal, I'm wondering, Jana, maybe I'll start with you. Just what do you think is the opportunity we're missing if we're not ready to face the critique, or at least listen to it and then think about how we might move forward knowing about it?
Yeah, well, it's great to see everyone today. To add on to sort of that reaction, I think what's been interesting is to see the commonality that people found in where we thought the root cause problems of the sector were. So we talk about money is at the kind of heart of our dysfunction, distrust, and double standards. And what was surprising, I think, is that everybody applied it to their own situation. So the foundations would tell us that it really spoke to the relationship that they had with their boards or their trustees, that they felt that there was a lot of distrust there, that there were double standards. The nonprofits between their relationship with the funders, but the nonprofits and the nonprofits. And I think what we're leaving on the table here is the solution to real problems that aren't getting solved. When we look at some of these issues going on in our world right now, things like homelessness in San Francisco, the refugee crisis globally, like sort of the challenges to democracy. How is any of that going to get solved if everybody's just working in their own little silo with their own little brand, needing to take credit for everything that they do? And I think that's the potential of these epic partnerships that we're talking about is the idea that we could actually tackle some of these big problems instead of us each saying like, oh, I only do this little piece over here. Like, yes, I believe in education, but here's my little piece. We got to get all the little pieces together if we're going to get to any kind of real solutions.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any comments regarding that question? No. Okay. All right, I'll move on then. I appreciate that. Let's turn back to the book. So the book is about building epic partnerships between nonprofits and foundations. So Vu, could you please describe what you think is an epic partnership? What are the secret ingredients that go into that? And how do you know it when you see it?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about trust in the relationship. and being able to have honest conversations with one another, being able to cut through the BS. I think there's so much BS in our sector, and perpetuated by like really smart, brilliant people. And I feel like we need to just like cut through it. I feel like we just don't have time for a lot of these things anymore. Like overhead. Overhead should be like lobotomies and leech therapies. Like we should just not talk about them again. Like we just don't have time for it. Like funders should just get over overhead altogether. And things like sustainability and stuff. It's like I feel like so many of these philosophies are grounded in things that, we thought of like 2 decades ago. And I think it's time for our sector to move into the future, one that's grounded by trust and true partnership. I was writing last week about how we really need to just reconsider the whole grant application process. Like I don't understand why we're wasting thousands of nonprofit uh, hours just like translating one answer into different formats based on different funders' criteria about how they want to perceive the information. Do they want to look at it in one page or 300 characters or whatever? Like, I don't think we have time for this anymore. And so, epic relationship means that we're able to have these conversations and saying, you know what you're doing? Like, do you really want a quarterly report for a $5,000 grant? That's ridiculous. And we can tell you that it's ridiculous because we have a good enough partnership to be honest with one another, and so we can focus on the outcomes. I think that's what we're trying to achieve.
Great, thank you for that. As always, honest and fun, well, humorous in ways to answer. Thank you. Jessamine, from the other side of the table, can you describe on what you would think of as an epic partnership, and what are those ingredients?
So I'm actually excited. I can share a really cool case study that happened with one of my team members, the Perry Foundation. And so we've been writing this book. We wrote this book a year and a half ago, but in my job, it's not like we are like wizards of epic partnerships. We're still struggling with like all of the stuff that everybody else is struggling with, right? So the book is kind of the ideal of where we're trying to go. And one of my colleagues was just really kind of inspired and saying, like, we really need to double down on our values. If we're going to be epic partners, we need to actually have something to show for it. And one of the nonprofits that we fund at the Perry Foundation came to us and basically said they were in absolute dire straits. And that if they weren't able to get funding to close this cash crunch, and they had funding coming, but in typical foundation style, the funding wasn't being provided when it was actually needed, there was this gap. And this gap was going to mean that a significant number of the staff were going to be laid off if it wasn't filled. And so my colleague basically mobilized and said, I am basically going to become part of their team until this gap gets filled. And she spent hours emailing other funders, advocating, trying to just cut through the time of communication that it normally takes for a nonprofit to get clarity from a funder, and enabled them to get yeses and nos, mostly nos, but at least to know that it wasn't worth their time to continue to try and pressure these funders into responding to them and letting them know where they stood in time to fill this gap. None of those fundraising emails and conversations panned out, and so then she came back and said, like, we need to get creative. Can the Perry Foundation do anything to advance our grant? We had some constraints where we were not able to advance the grant in a way that would fill the gap for the organization. So we put our heads together and said, okay, but what if we could use our grant as a loan guarantee? And what if we can help them find a bank or a loaner to provide the capital upfront, and then our funding that's coming in later will be able to enable them to pay that back, but to weather the cash crunch. So a whole month goes by where we are effectively calling banks, providing all of our details to say we are, a solid guarantor. We were chasing down leads with the team, the nonprofit team, and we were in daily, constant contact via text, via email, via all sorts of other methods until we found a loan provider. We'd signed the paperwork to be the loan guarantor. We worked with one of our donor advised funds to provide the final paperwork to do that. And the organization called us on the day that the loan was finalized, and I could just hear in the executive director's voice it was just a really special moment in my career to know that we had actually gone to bat and stood side by side a nonprofit that we cared and believed in so much in the time when they truly needed it. And that's one of the moments that I have been most proud of our staff saying, no, we are going to raise the bar on what an epic partnership truly means. So big shout out to my colleague Lindsay who did that. And also to the nonprofit who I won't name, but for trusting us as well, and being completely honest about the situation and what they needed to solve the situation, but taking that risk to say, we are on the precipice, and we know that, in a normal situation, there's no way we would tell you this. But because we've started to make these moves in the direction of a trust-based partnership, we're going to lay it all on the table. And that was just really exciting to say, okay, I feel like that's one step towards this idea of epic partnership.
Wow. Shall we give Jessamine and her team a round of applause?
Yay, Lindsay!
Can I just jump in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's amazing. So you guys walked in the shoes of this nonprofit. You didn't mention the name of that nonprofit. That could be every single nonprofit on the planet. You could put their name in that situation, right? If any of us who've worked in nonprofit, we've been in that place. But I guess, doesn't it make you feel like we need a more systemic solution to all of that? Because aren't you exhausted
yes.
from having done that?
Yes.
That's exhausting,
Yes.
right? Why are we
Yes.
all in that situation all the time?
And that's why we're here with the book, is to say, yes, we can stand together more in the smaller, in those moments of urgency, and let's continue to stand together to figure out how to work with the rest of the funders of that nonprofit to say, how can we build a funding base that works for this organization, not for your grant timelines?
Yeah, thanks for that. Jane, do you have any stories you'd like to share about how you've seen any changes and what an epic partnership looks like, and just with the book out for a year, any movement that you've seen?
Yeah, well, I actually have some notes, because we get these great emails all the time from people who write in to tell us what they've been doing with the book, and also like how it's working and not working. So if you follow the epic partnership thing, each stands for something. So the E stands for equalize input. So the idea being here that the funding is not the most important input to social change. I think sometimes we all organize ourselves around that. The funders think that their money is the most important, and the nonprofits certainly sort of act many times as if the funding is the most important thing in the world. We heard from an executive director from Massachusetts who after she read the book, she internalized the idea that it was her responsibility to go and talk to her funders about what she really needed. And one of her funders had always only let them focus on materials or supplies and wouldn't fund salaries. So she actually educated the funder about the people are the ones who power the work, and that she really needed the funder to be funding salaries. And don't we all need all the funders to be funding salaries all the time? But what was the great thing is that the funder sat with that information, came back the next year, and prototyped, decided to do it as a prototype that they would give a grant that didn't restrict the percentage that could go to salaries. And let the person know that it was her feedback that made that difference. And I think that's so important, because it's pretty scary as a nonprofit going out there to say, hey, I really want you to value all the rest of the things that we're putting into this, not just like seeing one organization's money go into a particular program with a name on it. So that was an equalized input.
Woo!
Yeah.
That was a great one. Then the other one was prioritize needs of those we serve. So for foundations, it's the needs of the nonprofits, and for nonprofits, the needs of the community. And we heard from the Greenlight Fund, who's doing a big watch party today, that they asked a third-party evaluator to evaluate their effectiveness as a grant-making partner. And they had them go back to all their national and local leaders since 2004, talk to every single one of them. And what came back was the feedback that the nonprofit partners felt like Greenlight wasn't doing quite enough in the latter years of their partnership. So in a 4-year partnership, that 4th year where they're going to be moving on to beyond that partnership, they felt like wasn't really well supported. So Greenlight took that feedback, and now they're working on it. They're actually digging in to say, okay, we hear you. Like if that's not working for the group that we serve, our nonprofit partners, we're going to change it. Another one that we heard was from the Ray and Ty Norda Foundation that looked at their grant renewal process because they realized it didn't really prioritize the needs of nonprofits. Like once nonprofits had gone through all that work to get a grant, did they really need to start all over again to get the next grant? So they changed how they did the renewal process. And then they actually published a blog about it and talked about how they had been influenced by the feedback from their grantees, listening to the needs, and also through the book. Okay, so then is increase trust and empathy. And this one I really like. There was a foundation that decided to pay all their multi-year grants up front to say, like, we trust you. If this is a $5 million grant over 3 years, we're giving you the $5 million up front. You figure out how to spend it. You know, we all know that the expenses aren't neatly boxed, even though we write those bogus budgets that put all the expenses neatly in those years. They are not neatly in those years, right? We're investing a lot of money in the beginning. So they decided that they wanted to signal trust and get the money off the table for the partnership. So here's all the money, and now let's work together for 5 years. So I thought that was a really good one. And then C is commit to big, bold, and better. And there's this great group that got going in Detroit called COAC Detroit that is it's like a multi-year investment. All these nonprofits that got together with this funder that was sunsetting, and they created they created the name together, they came up with the areas of impact, they came up with the key values, and they said, we're gonna do this all around the same table, focus on the needs of Detroit, and no one person is better than the other. But we're going to be bolder than we've been in the past. We're not just going to do incremental change. And then the final one that I want to talk about, which I hope is not embarrassing to our hosts here today, but the idea that Foundation Center and GuideStar, 2 nonprofits that frankly probably were competitors for funding through much of their lives, got together and formed this group called Candid, which is hosting us here today, I think is like a real example of this commit to big, bold, better, where organizations can see that if they put all their assets, all their network, and all their funders together, they can be in better service to their mission, which is the nonprofit sector. So I was really impressed by that. I'm sure that was not inspired by the book. I'm sure there were years in the making. But we could all be doing that, I think, finding our partners and actually seeing that we could be bigger and bolder together.
We've got some major unicorn crushes in some of these.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
So
look
I
them
think
up.
we all deserve to give another round of applause for all those amazing stories. Thank you. And thank you for that shout out too. And we can have that conversation later too. But Vu, I want to invite you to say any stories or share any stories that you've heard that seems to be helping to move this movement forward and get closer to those epic partnerships.
Yeah, I do. There are a lot of program officers who are doing great, and I do feel like sometimes I am really good at criticizing people and yelling at people. But I do want to acknowledge that there are just really amazing program officers out there who are working the inside, and I know it can be really frustrating because sometimes there are power dynamics. There are power dynamics between the staff at foundations and the trustees of the foundations. Very much mirrors the dynamics that we have with program officers. But there are lots of just really amazing program officers, some who have been advocating for my own organization, LDC, and it's been really great. Actually, one of the epic partnerships we've had is with one of our foundations. We've been building relationships with them for a while. And the trustees are just like, well, we don't know about investing in communities of color. We don't know about this. And the staff kept pushing. And actually, at one point, we were in a blog together because the challenge we were both expressing is, well, staff at foundations oftentimes don't have the autonomy to make a lot of funding decisions, and trustees are wonderful, but they're oftentimes not the most knowledgeable people to be making decisions, but yet they are given all of the power to make these grant decisions. So then the staff and I were talking about this and brainstorming about, okay, what do we do about this? And so I was thinking, well, maybe I was thinking about this, and I want to write about this. I want to write about how we need to empower staff of foundations with more autonomy. And they said, okay, this is really great. Would you mind timing this post for right before our board trustees meet? And I was like, okay, sure. I was on a plane. I was like, I was not planning to write this because I had a more fun blog post to write, and I was going to work on that. But because we have a strong partnership, focus on trust, I was like, okay, sure. I'm going to write this faster. I'm gonna publish it on Monday, and that was really helpful because then the board members read the blog and they're like, hey, this is actually kind of a good point that Boo is bringing up. So they were able to discuss this at the foundation board meeting, and the board actually agreed, and they said, we're going to try to work to give our staff more autonomy in grant making decisions. And I think this is like a great example of like we can actually be partners together if we can have these honest conversations, and we can start being more strategic about things if we're not focused on distracting red herrings in the sector. But I do think it is a little pervasive that we have this sort of philosophy that we're like, even the question that you asked, Michelle, and I ask this all the time, which is like, what is it like on the other side of the table? Jasmine, you're on the other side of the table, right? And I think we have to get out of that mindset. We're on the same side of the table, right? Like we're at the same table. The table needs to move from being a square table to being a round table where everyone is on one side altogether. And I think that's how we start really having these epic partnerships.
Great, thank you for that. And yes, I agree. We should be on the same side of the table, for sure. We're all working for the same good in many ways, and we should, there shouldn't be that separation, which is what I'm excited about for Candid, that we're one organization and we're addressing the sector needs. So there's my one shameless plug. So let's just go back to the idea, Jane, that you were bringing up, that there are systemic changes or challenges that are facing us. And I'm wondering if maybe you could start in naming a couple of these pervasive challenges that are stopping us from moving forward so that there aren't more stories like the ones we've just heard.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think when I think about what the challenges in our sector is, we're not a very regulated sector. Like there really aren't rules. But somehow, in all of our unicorn awesomeness, we're all kind of rule followers at the end of the day. It's like we wanted to create all these rules around us. So what are the real rules in the nonprofit sector? Philanthropy got this guidance that you're supposed to give out at least 5% of your assets every year, and somehow it got interpreted as give out 5% of your assets every year too also. So then we tagged it all to an annual cycle instead of a cycle of change, which might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 20 years. And then we built all these systems around it. So I think it's like going back to those systemic pieces that we need to actually just throw out and reconsider. And stop. And if we wanted to create rules, maybe the rules should be different rules that actually measure impact or measure partnership or something like that, instead of these super arbitrary rules. Because I think they have to do with how much money flows, how it flows, who sets the strategy. I think there's a lot of systemic challenges around strategy. I know from the nonprofit side of the world that I'm constantly reading about how 10 foundations will get together to set strategy for the field, but there won't be any nonprofits or any community members involved in that. Also, like conversely, I think to Vu's point of how nonprofits could help, I'm sorry, we just land on that for a second, right? Like it just, is Vu like, terrible face? Thanks, Vu. Yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense. Also because I think we could expedite that. Sometimes I think that what happens is foundations want to be inclusive, so they go out and ask a lot of nonprofits for input on their strategy. And it takes a very long time. Yeah, these listening tours take a long time. If you just let the nonprofit set the strategy, you could get that done in 2 days, because we don't spend a lot of time on strategy. We know what we need to do. So things like that, like let's go back up to the top of what governs our sector and reconsider that we really have a lot of leeway to do it any which way we want. We don't have that many rules.
Thanks for that. Go ahead, Vu. I know you want to talk.
I completely agree with Jane. I feel like we have traditions, right? And then we have like legal stuff that we have to do. And we start to believe that the traditions that we have are now legally obligated. I was talking to Hildy Gottlieb, who's been working on this organization called Creating the Futures, which is really brilliant. And we're just talking about the board. And as an example of this, like we assume that boards have to run a certain way, that they have to do this, they have to meet monthly, they have to have like 8 to 10 people, they have to, etc. And the reality is there's only a few key requirements of boards. They have to have 3 people who meet once a year, who then file the 990. Everything else is just tradition. And yet, this is one of the biggest challenges in our sector is like the dysfunction of board of directors. And yet we don't acknowledge it because we're like, this is how it's always going to be. And it's the same with foundations. I got into a verbal fist fight with a foundation program officer once, where she's, we were having coffee and she was just like, we're thinking about setting these priorities and it's been really challenging. I don't know what strategies do you recommend? I'm like, I just looked at her and I said, what gives you the right to set any strategies? You're not on the ground doing the work. Why do you think you should be setting strategies? What makes you think that you should set strategy? What gives you the right to set strategy? Is it because you have money? Why is money, as we mentioned in the book, the most important input? Why? Why would that override the people who are actually on the ground doing the work and having the lived experience? So this entire philosophy that foundations have the right to set strategies, priorities that nonprofits then have to align with. Like, I cannot stand this question, like, of how are you going to align? How do you align with our strategies? We've been trained to be this, which is like, oh, we align, blah, blah, blah. Our program's like this is how we align. When really the answer that all of us are thinking is like, why do we need to align with your strategies? Who gave you any right to give? I know that sounds really aggressive because I'm grumpy. My chocolate yet. But like, I feel like we need to just challenge that. Like, we should be creating strategies together. But honestly, the people on the ground who are doing the work should be leading in this, and funders should be supporting that with their strengths, because we need our funders to be doing things that nonprofits cannot do, just to mobilize people with privilege and power and start shaping systems in that way. But the work that's on the ground needs to be led by nonprofits.
Thank you for sharing your view. Oh, here's the unicorn. That's all of us together.
That was Ted the unicorn.
Yes, Ted the unicorn. Jessica, Jessamine, I'm so sorry. I keep doing that, and I apologize.
You can just call me Jessica. I'll be Jessica
Okay,
for
great.
you.
I will do that.
There we go.
No, but no, really, I would love for you to chime in on this as well.
So, yes, everything that has been said. I think I'm really excited because I've been hearing a lot of conversations at the staff leadership levels of foundations where the staff and the leadership of foundations are completely on board with this at this point. They're just trying to figure out how to do it. And so I'm very intrigued to see what's going to happen in the next couple of years where I think we're going to start seeing foundations starting to play with their governance structures. And I'm really intrigued to see who's the first foundation who is going to have literally a community member experiencing the issue area, representing 50% of their board? Or who is the first foundation who's going to have requirements to say a third of our board is, yes, the individuals who are bringing that money to the table and have committed it to the social good, but a third of those members are going to be community members, and a third of those members are going to be issue area experts and nonprofit leaders. I'm really interested to see which foundations are going to come up with really amazing training for their boards, where it's going to be, okay, if you're a board member, you're going to be in the community 40 hours a month. You're going to be learning from the expertise of researchers and nonprofit leaders and all sorts of peers with varied other input values to bring to the table so that we're all exchanging that information and those, and just there's so many rich resources in our sector. It's just how do we bring them together and not have this hierarchy of decision making and direction of the sector, and just start to meld those things. How do we bring funders into the nonprofit organizations and events and communities to learn and to share what they know, and how do we bring nonprofit and community members into the spaces of foundations? And it's really about that blending. I think I personally think, and very much hope, that we're going to see people starting to play with those ideas of integration, because I have a lot of colleagues out there who I have major crushes on right now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're going to beat us to it. You're going to be the one to do this. It's going to be so cool. So I'm very, very positive.
Can I hop on that one for a second?
Sure.
I mean, I feel super encouraged about the foundations too. I really do, because in this first year, they're the ones who responded to the criticism the most and took it in and became self-critical and decided to stuff. And I'm not just going to say nice things about foundations to say nice things about foundations. But I just saw everybody's face when Vu kind of went off just there it was interesting here in the room. The discomfort, I think many of you come from the nonprofit side in here in San Francisco, and from the fundraiser side. And I felt it too. Like, I saw many of you look down. There was a lot of like, ooh, is he really saying that? And I think that's the response that we got from the nonprofit sector this past year. Was everyone was glad that we said these things. We sort of showed how we're both dysfunctional. But the nonprofit, like, mostly what we all did is we kind of looked down and said, good, you guys go keep saying those things. But I'm not going to say it to my funder, or I'm not going to ask my funder for a different way of working or present a partnership that I want to be in with them. So I think that the work now is on the nonprofit side a bit. And I'm not trying to give us more work, because we certainly have lots of work. But we do have to step through this new idea of how the partnerships could look, because the funders think that they're really open now. Many of us said, like, we're really transparent about stuff. We want feedback. We want all these things, but we can't get anything from our nonprofit partners, won't step through that door. So you may not feel that openness. But I guess you have to take a leap of faith that it's there, and that this is the time, if you want to see change, it to be like the ED from Massachusetts who said, if it's not me, who's going to do it?
I think that's a great place to be. One of the things I would say, too, is if you have done that, if you have stepped through that door, I think we'd like to hear more about that. So, there's certainly ways to get that information and get it to the authors. Certainly you can send it to to Candid as well, and we can pass it on. But I think the more we know of others doing it, I think the more we're going to have the courage to do it. So, and having success on the other side, or even if there isn't a success, I mean, I think the idea is that we're putting ourselves out there and we're actually participating in that conversation. So thank you for that. I do want to open it up for questions. So if everyone would like to come up here and come to the podium who's in the room, and if there are questions online, go ahead and we'll make sure that we get them up here. But I'll just close our part with just one question. So a year and a half in, the book is written, it's printed, it's there. If you could make any tweaks, major edits, change something up, what was the one thing that you would want to do differently with this book, if anything? Jane, you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I wish we had started with the unicorn dreams instead of the unicorn nightmares, because I think we all know the nightmares. The nightmares are very satisfying to read, and Jessamyn's illustrations, I think, made us all laugh and brought it home that we all experienced the same stuff. But the bigger challenge, I think, for all of us is getting to envisioning what we want and making it real. And I wish we had just started there, because we get stuck in a really small place of, gosh, we'd really like general operating support, instead of thinking about, gosh, we'd really like to solve homelessness. Mm-hmm. And I would have started with the bigger picture if I could bring that last section to the front.
Great, Jessamyn.
I think I would have wanted to make it clearer that the Epic Partnerships message is really inclusive of so many other movements that are happening in our field right now. Like, we're seeing so much progress in the elevation of the dialogue around DEI. We're seeing a really interesting wave of conversation about how can we as organizations in a field think about protecting the well-being of our staff so that we have longevity. We're seeing conversations led by various organizations about the importance of risk capital, or overhead, or how do we think more about trust-centered relationships. There's lots of different movements out there, and I think just bringing them all together and saying, like, we're all heading in the same direction, let's do this together. There might be different entry points for you, but the point is every one of these movements is saying, let's be better together.
Great, thank you for that, Jessamine. How about you, Vu? We'll end with you on that part.
Yeah, I'd probably say if I could go back in time, I would probably ask for more emphasis on like DEI and how these funding dynamics are affecting the organizations led by communities of color. Like there should, it would be great to have like a chapter on unicorns of color and what we're going through. Because the reality is unicorns of color are leaving the sector now a lot. It is a serious problem, and we're just not really, the sector is not paying attention to the fact that leaders of color are just like abandoning their jobs and position, and sometimes the sector. And in Seattle, we become real estate agents for some reason. But that is like, it's a serious problem that we're not really addressing. Is that these funding dynamics that we have, yes, the unicorn nightmares they're severe, but they're even worse for unicorns, for marginalized communities. Leaders of organizations of, with disabilities, with people of color, LGBTQ communities. And I think it'll be great for maybe our next edition to really add like a really chapter on that.
I just wanted to give Vu just a tiny, tiny bit of hope on that one, because I totally hear you, Vu. Your blog post about EDs of color, one of my board members who is new to being deeply involved in board work read that blog post after one of my staff members put it in front of him, and he finished reading it and was just like, what? I didn't realize this was a thing. How is this a thing? Like this shouldn't be a thing. I want to learn more. And we then helped him form a working group with 2 of our staff to dive into research and perspective that has been shared that he was not aware of before. And so anyway, just tiny, tiny sparkle of unicorn hope for you, Vu.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, great. So, questions. Do we have any in the room or on the live stream? Great, and I should repeat that so everyone hears it, but I think if you're on the chat, you could probably see that question coming in. But it's about, okay, my coffee has gone missing. I can't, so one more time, please. And then I could, or maybe here, come.
Can you give specific examples or tools on how to actually educate donors to consider the grantee perspective and for that to affect their funding decisions?
Great, so this is about donor education around needs of nonprofits. Who would like to take that?
I'll start. Don't overthink it. You don't need a tool. You really have decades of experience going through these processes. Uncover what you're going through and how it affects your organization in a conversation with a donor. Or if you feel uncomfortable, write a little letter to them and present it that way. But I don't think we need tools. I think the tools is our experience, and we're helping them see how a different way gets a better result at the end of the day.
And not a tool, but just a tip that we've used at our foundation is we've kind of tested the water by just sending different things to board members and seeing what their reaction is. And if something's too far for them, then we rein it in a tiny bit and find the boundary and then just slowly start to expand it again. But I think there's so many people, including Vu, but like many, many other people writing about many different issues experienced in the social sector, and especially about DEI right now. So there's an incredible amount of resources, and you can find a resource for whatever end of the political spectrum your board is, for whatever topics within that you think might be most accessible to them. And so just taking that step to say, hey, I thought you might be interested in this. We've been reading it as a team and discussing it. Let me know what you think. And then just getting that, it's kind of a divining tool of trying to figure out where your board members are and then what it is that they will catch on to and say, I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that.
And one other thing is, I think you can always get people's interest if you present examples of success. So if you're speaking to a funder to share, hey, did you know that this one donor that we work with did this kind of partnership with us and it worked out like this? It's sort of, you don't have to go into the critical part of it. It's just that here, if we did it this way, we might have this other kind of result.
Funders like friends. Like if somebody else has already taken the leap, then, especially if they're bigger than us as well, then that's often really helpful.
Thank you for that. Vu, do you have any comments?
Yeah, one tool is the grantadvisor.org, which is like an anonymous Yelp-like place where you can post reviews of foundations. Not just complaints, but like what are they doing well and what are areas they need to improve on. And it's anonymous. And I do think there are some power dynamics we need to acknowledge that can be difficult to talk to foundations. And we are terrified of giving direct, honest feedback. So I do like Grant Advisor as a tool. But I do agree with Jane about, we do have the knowledge and we just need to actually go and talk to funders. And oftentimes our fear is not really based on truth. I remember there was a grant application that asked at the end of the grant application, do you have any feedback for us? It's on the application. I'm like, oh my God, I have so much feedback for you. But I don't want to jeopardize this $10,000 grant that I'm getting that I need. But I was like, you know what? They asked for this, and I want to trust that they actually have, the integrity to be able to listen and to not punish my organization for giving the direct feedback. And I wrote a bunch of feedback, including, please don't ever ask me to ask for my board chair's signature on this grant application again, ever. That's a waste of my time, waste everyone's time. Why would you even do this? Why? Do you want to take people down? I told them I wasted 3 hours because my board chair could not be reached by email and phone. I had to drive up in Seattle traffic for 3 hours to get his signature for a $10,000 grant. That is a waste of my time. I put that down in there. And they
All right, great.
They called back. I was like, Vu, we got your feedback, the board chair's signature. Here's why we asked for it. It's because, sometimes we do some grants and we, in the past, we've actually had some organizations that their board chair was not involved in it. And one of the things that they asked us for was board development. And if the board wasn't aware of this and they wanted board development and they're not aware of it, then that board development capacity building project is not going to go well. And I said, I completely understand. And at the same time, it just shows a lack of trust in the staff being able to do the operations. And grant writing is an operation, it is not board business. And the next year, they removed that question.
Huh. Interesting. Do they still ask that question?
You said they
They stopped asking.
Oh, they removed it. Oh, they removed the question.
Well,
Okay.
no. They still keep asking for feedback, but they stopped asking people.
They stopped asking for that. Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that. I was like, I'm not sure if that's a good story.
No more board chair signature. That I feel like is one of my biggest successes in life.
All right, thank you. Okay, great. So, come on up.
So I feel like I may be stuck in the depression side of things because I feel like I'm not quite buying into the idea that we all have the same goals. Funders received their money because of historical systems of oppression, and I don't quite believe that everyone wants to fund the things and create the social change. And so I feel like part of the we align with your strategy is sort of what you were talking about just now. How do you get your board member interested in these conversations? It's still catering to the money. trying to find the in rather than saying like, hey, like, just trust us. It still feels a little icky to me. It's not really a question, but I'd love to hear
Great.
thoughts around that.
So just want to make sure that the live stream audience could hear that question. Okay, good. All right, thanks.
You can start.
Jessica?
Jessica's up.
I'm just going to change my name to Jessica. I think everyone likes it better that way. Where are you? There you go. I agree with you. Like, I don't think we've reached this utopia of where everybody can have honest, open conversations, but there's probably one funder that you can have that open conversation with. And that one funder can be the person that you then say, okay, let's make some progress together. And then when we've made progress together, how can you help me influence this other funder who's like on the cusp of being able to understand that we have needs that they don't understand at this point. So I really acknowledge your frustration. Like I know that only goes so far, given that I've never been in your shoes. But I also just really encourage you to focus on the bright spots and harness the funders that do get it and train us. Like, please tell us how to be better for you with the ones that are open to that feedback. Tell us how to be better, because you have so much power over how your program officers actually interact with you. And if there's a way that you can let that one or two funders that are open to feedback know how they can be better for you, and be an advocate with other funders, how they can be better with you, like, that starts to open the door.
Yeah. I mean, I can add on to that. Sometimes I think we've designed a system that is focused on like a few bad actors instead of the fact that most of us, like on the face level, are good actors, right? And I agree with you that there are some funders out there that don't want to sort of create the same kind of change that nonprofits do. And there are some nonprofits out there, maybe a few, that are like wasting money somehow or are bad actors. But somehow we created this whole system around those few bad actors instead of just giving each other all the benefit of the doubt that we're all on that same team and everyone's there for the right purpose. I think so much of the funding procedures are around preventing from that one nonprofit that might waste your money. Right, and we all bristle at that, but we're kind of dishing it out in the same way to the funders to say, like, we don't really trust that you're in this with us. So it doesn't solve the problem, but I think on the nonprofit side we do have to kind of react about the double standards. If we don't like feeling like funders don't trust us, we can't really not trust them either as a reaction.
Thank you for that. I know we're almost at time. I know one person has been waiting for a question, so I'll do that first.
Thank you. My question is kind of piggybacking on her question, and it's more like a comment, but really to open up the conversation, you've got nonprofit funders, foundations, and you've got nonprofits. And I feel like there is oftentimes a disconnect in trust, right? How can you guys as foundations trust the nonprofit to follow your wishes, or how can the nonprofit trust the foundation to, fund their grant proposal? Just that.
So trust. I think we've brought up a couple of ways of how we would try to strengthen that trust. I don't know if anyone has some other ideas they'd like to share on or examples of how they've worked on trust.
I can speak to the funder side of like starting to plant the seeds of trust. Like, if you work for a funding organization and you want to build a basis of trust with nonprofits who have every reason to distrust you, one of the first things that I think we encourage our staff to do is to be vulnerable with the nonprofit and actually share, a little bit more about what happens behind the curtain of, we don't have full control, or this is where my influence ends, and then this is where I can be your advocate, and then this is how the process then proceeds after that, and just being more transparent about what we can and can't do, and how things operate in our organizations, and how decisions are made, and then also, empathizing with the feelings of, that might be common in that relationship as well. There's often a parallel between the way nonprofits feel about foundations and how foundation staff feel about their boards. Right? There's this power dynamic there that's very difficult, and in a weird way, like, we're often struggling with a very similar set of challenges there. And I think there's more trust that can be built around sharing those challenges and sharing strategies for moving past them that can help build that foundation of open communication.
Thank you. Anything from Vu or Jane about trust?
Yeah, I agree with Jessamine. And I think on the nonprofit side, we also need to stop lying all the time to our funders, right? We've been trained to do this. They're like, is everything okay? And they're like, yeah, it's okay. And reality is like, oh my God, everything's on fire. 3 staff quit. We don't have enough people in our programs. There are mice at the office, whatever.
Yeah.
And we're just like, yeah, we're fine, because we don't want to project this aura of dysfunction. But I think that's, to Jessamine point about being vulnerable and being transparent, we should say this. Like, yes, we are having a difficult time right now. And I remember actually running a program, an after school program, and one spring day, like only half the kids showed up. And I was just so terrible. And I was like, and one of the first things that I thought was, I'm gonna call my funder. We had a great relationship. I called her up and I was like, I'm so sorry. I just feel terrible, and I want to talk to you because half the kids are not showing up to the program, and I feel like a failure. And she was like, Boo, it's spring, right? All the kids in every single program has been playing hooky. It's Seattle. We only get 3 days of sunshine a year. So like all the kids were out. It's not just you, it's everyone. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you. That was really helpful. Right? I didn't feel like a failure anymore. I was like, okay, we need to take our kids out, and we need to attract them back to the program by actually having more outdoor activities and so on. So that's what we did. But that's kind of what we mean by being transparent and having a good relationship, where we actually, like, it feels great that the first person I thought about calling was the funder of this program. Like, I feel like that's how it should be.
Thank you for that. Jane, do you have any?
I just add, when you think of any relationship where you have trust, it's usually because it's over a long period of time and you've been through bad things together. And possibly because you made a commitment at the start that you're going to be there for each other over a longer period of time. And, the more that we could approach our relationships like that, then I think trust gets built. But we can't expect to have trust in 1-year cycles or the way that we've set it up now, and with keeping a good face on everything on both sides. I think if we go through some bad times together, we'll have more trust to solve things.
Thank you. Well, thank you for hanging in there for 5 extra minutes. I think it was worth it. And I just want to close out the live stream portion of this program, and the in-person will continue as well as the watch parties. But please join me in thanking Jessamine, Jane, and Vu for their time and their energy behind this.